welcome to Light Law version 2.0. It's been a while since we did this, but I feel like we should kind of try again, revamp it, and make it the best it can possibly be. There was a lot of things in the old series that could have been improved upon, and that's what I'm doing right here. I'm going to improve upon what we did previously, keep it the same general feel, the same general idea, but just try and make it a little bit better. With the old series, we covered all the major houses, and we covered a few of the extra things like Valeria and all those good things, but I feel like we should focus more on what's happening in the current episodes. When this goes up, Game of Thrones Season 5 should be started, so I'll try and base Light Law around Season 5, and each episode I'll do an episode of this in conjunction with the show. So let's say there's a Bravosi episode, right? We'll talk about the bloody faceless men and mention them. That'll tie into the show, and that'll also mean it's kind of topical and fits the time. So hey ho, let's hope that works, and let's hope that's a better kind of way of ordering things. Visually, we'll try and improve it as well. I feel like the visuals were too kind of cheap, too kind of Michael Bay in the way we did them. We had like weird effects all over the screen. We'll try and make it a little bit more simple, make it a little bit more kind of bearable to watch, and try and incorporate different things into the show. This one's a bit of a weird one. This isn't about the books, it's not about the show, but this is about the Telltale game. Now Telltale have done a little bit of kind of lore on the characters, and they have talked about them a little bit, but I feel like the game is something in the Game of Thrones universe that really does need one of these kind of videos, and it deserves one, because a lot of the things mentioned in the game aren't mentioned very much in the other source material, so it means that we can kind of build upon that, and I can let you know about stuff about the characters that you wouldn't otherwise know. So since we're going to base it on the game, it makes sense to start the first episode on House Forrester. Now House Forrester are the protagonists of the Telltale game, and they are who you're rooting for throughout the whole experience. They're who you're supposed to kind of have the best interests of, and they're who you're supposed to care about, much like the Starks in the show and books. Granted, the Starks weren't the only protagonists, but in the game the only protagonists are the kind of Forresters and Garrett Tuttle, who's a squire to the Forresters, but all the people in that are the one family. It's not like Game of Thrones, where you have Lannisters, you have Starks, you have Tyrells. It's not loads of different people, it's just this one family and a focus on them. Granted, they are in different places, but they all have the same kind of general interests and the same kind of feel to them. But House Forrester is something that's never mentioned in the books. There's like a passing quote of one character, and that's all it is. And I think that was clever on Telltale's part, because what they did is they chose an obscure house so they could build upon it. Much like they did with Walking Dead, they chose Lee and Clementine, new characters, so that they could really make the game their own. If Telltale had chosen the Starks, they'd be stuck on a path. Stuck on the path of the show, and have to kind of tie in with that. But with the Forresters, they can veer off and do their own thing. But they have got some lore about the Forresters, and some extra info that might be quite kind of interesting to you who like the game. It's pretty cool, the game's cool, and the actual house is cool. So let's jump right in and talk about the members. Now the main one is Gregor Forrester. Now he is the head of the house, he's the liege lord, much like Tywin and Eddard were. He's known for his honour and is known as Gregor the Good. He is a vassal house to House Glover, who are in turn a vassal house to the Starks. So the Forresters are pretty like low down the food chain. They're not a major house, they're not the Lannisters, Tyrells, Starks. They're not even a secondary house, they're like the bottom of the bottom almost, but what they lack in size and responsibility, they make up for in their resources. And their main resource is something that a lot of people want, ironwood, but we'll get onto that later on. So how did Gregor and his house, the Forresters, become vassal to the Glovers? Now it could just be down to location, that is plausible, and that would make a lot of sense. You wouldn't be joining the Lannisters if you lived in the north, because you'd get killed straight away. That'd be stupid. You were joining the Lannisters while you lived at the very bottom of the north, surrounded by Starks. No. If you live in the north, generally you'll join bloody Starks. If you live on the Iron Islands, you're generally going to join the Krakens, you're generally going to join the Greyjoys, so that you don't get killed. You know what I mean? You try and blend in as much as possible. That was the main reason, I imagine. There's also the fact that they had an arm wrestle. And you might be thinking, an arm wrestle? What the bloody fuck? Where? Eh? But yeah, people wrestle a lot in the north to like kind of settle wagers and settle kind of arguments. For example, House Mormont live on Bear Island, but they didn't always live in Bear Island. It was captured by Roderick Stark, who wrestled the Iron Island men in order to take it. So they didn't even have a full-on battle, they just had a little wrestle in darkness, and then that's how he took it. So they have like weird kind of fisticuff wagers in order to settle arguments. It must be a northern kind of tradition, because you wouldn't have that happening in King's Landing. I mean, you might do, but it would normally take place in a brothel, wrestle and settle wages, but hey ho, there you go. But yeah, they had an arm wrestle, and the whole agreement was, if Gregor won the wrestle, he would be a squire to the Glovers. And that was a really kind of esteemed thing to be. It was a really kind of revered station for him to be in, because at that time his house wasn't well known for ironwood, wasn't well known for anything really. So having that kind of vassal position would really be a good thing for his house and for his family's future. Now he won it, naturally, because he's, you know, he's with the Glovers. It'd be a bit shit if he didn't win it, he was just left to die, but he won it, and that is why they're with the Glovers, because they had an arm wrestle and he won. In turn, that meant that he joined the Glovers and in turn joined the Starks. So that was pretty good. Now somebody else who deserves mention is Lady Alyssa Forrester. She's the matriarch of the house, much like Catelyn Stark and Cersei Lannister are, and she is, despite being a female, the most powerful person in the house, arguably. She has the most experience, she's been around the longest, and she knew Gregor, the Old Lord. She was married to him. Now, she wasn't always with the Forresters. These aren't the Targaryens we're talking about, they don't marry family. She was originally with House Branfield, and House Branfield aren't actually in the north, and aren't actually aligned with the Starks at all. So the fact that she joined the Forresters, the fact that she was wed to the Forresters, is something that is very, very interesting indeed, and something that deserves mention because of her location, but also because of the person and house she was aligned with. You see, the Targaryens were once in power, and were once a kind of force to be reckoned with. They had dragons, they had an army that you could just use at their whim, they burned people alive, and yeah, they were feared throughout the realm. But after Robert took over the throne, after the Lannisters and the Baratheons took over the throne and kind of seated themselves there, they usurped it, the Targaryens were hated. The Targaryens were vilified by the new kind of king, and were said to be just evil, kind of dragon creatures. And that was supported by the fact that everybody thought they were dead, so they couldn't defend themselves. So for example, if the Baratheons said the Targaryens fucked dragons, the Targaryens couldn't defend themselves. Nobody could say otherwise, because they were all dead, and Varys and Daenerys were hiding, so nobody could kind of defend their honour, defend their house, so their reputation and their honour was indeed tarnished. So after the Targaryens were defeated, anybody who was aligned with them would have to just say vows to the new king and relinquish any old power. And that happened quite a lot. There was many cases of people who lost their seat, who lost their kind of lands, because they were with the Targaryens and were seen as enemies to the crown. And the Branfields were seen in that light. Because they sided with the Targaryens, they were vilified, they lost everything. And while many would kind of just say, we don't like the Targaryens anymore, Lady Alyssa's house did not do that. They instead kept siding with the Targaryens, even after they were all dead. They were stubborn as hell. They said, no, the Targaryens are right, the Targaryens are good people, and the Baratheons and Lannisters did not like that very much. To the point that they just destroyed the whole house. They just wiped it out, took any ounce of power that they once had, and meant that the House Branfield was destroyed forever. It's very similar to the House Castamere story. The fact that House Castamere kind of was destroyed by the Lannisters just goes to show what kind of might and what kind of power they truly do hold. Similar thing here, House Branfield. Lady Alyssa's old house was indeed destroyed, and any reputation or any kind of land they held was destroyed with it. And that's something that she holds dear to her heart. She remembers that in a very ill manner, for rightful reasons. Her family all died, they were all kind of tarnished, and she doesn't want that to befall House Forrester. And that's one of the main parts of the game. Your mother had her house destroyed, and she doesn't want to see the same thing happen with yours. It's very kind of similar to Catelyn Stark, in the sense that like they both want to keep their house alive. But I suppose that's true for anybody. The fact that she's trying to keep her house alive, the fact that she's trying so hard to keep everybody who she loves alive, is normal and would be seen in anybody in the Game of Thrones universe. Apart from Roose probably, because Roose is a cunt. Now, one of the things that's mentioned in Game of Thrones is growing to love your partner. So Lady Catelyn probably didn't love Eddard at the start because she loved Brandon before him. so she grew to love him over time. And that's what people say a lot with kind of arranged marriages. Oh, don't worry, you'll grow to love him, you'll love him in time. And that's what happened with Lady Alyssa Forrester. You see, she was forced to marry Gregor. Because her house was aligned with the Targaryens, because her house was seated in the south, not the north, she didn't have any kind of relationship with Gregor before they were wed. She kind of wed out of kind of fear, out of kind of desperation, and had no idea what kind of man he was. It's a good job he was Gregor the Good instead of Gregor the Gargantuan, because he could have been a very horrible person indeed to her, but because he was kind-hearted, because he was nice, she grew to love him, and indeed took on the role of the Lady of House Forrester. After they had kids, that kind of solidified the kind of relationship they had, and meant that she really did want to be part of that house and grow this new kind of house, a new fresh start, and make amends with old people. Now, she wasn't the only person from her previous house that went over to the Forresters. Malcolm, a recurring character in the game, is somebody else who's part of her old house. I always thought he was on Gregor's side of the family, but no, he is in fact brother, Lady Alyssa Forrester, and must have joined as some kind of steward or some kind of servant to her house. So the fact that he did that, and the fact that Gregor let her brother come along, shows just how good he was. But you have to take into account the fact that all of his past house, all of the Lady Alyssa's old family were dead, so you couldn't just leave him on the streets, he had to have a home. So that home was House Forrester. And he is a valuable ally to them. He does do a lot of good stuff. I'm not going to spoil anything that he does, but even just character-wise, he's a nice guy, he's a good-hearted guy, and somebody you really would want to have around. So that's Lady Forrester's history, just a brief kind of overview of what happened in her life, a brief overview of what happened in her history, and a brief overview of her character in general. So the second person we're going to talk about is Gregor's son, and the eldest son, Roderick Forrester. Now, there's not a lot known about Roderick before the series takes place. There is enough to warrant his mention. Roderick is very similar to Robb Stark in the way that he's kind of a younger warrior trying to improve himself, trying to make sure that people know of him and his house. He's very kind of honourable, much like his father, and he's very brazen in what he does. He's a warrior in heart and normally attacks first and thinks later. Now this all does kind of depend on how you play the game. Because Telltale is an RPG, your Roderick could be methodical, could be evil, it could be anything, but generally he has these kind of same traits no matter what you do, and he is a very honourable person, he is a great warrior, and that doesn't really change. But generally, yeah, there is a few changes of his character depending on what kind of dialogue choices you choose. He's a feared warrior as well. He's known for his combat, he's known for what he does, and that's mainly because of what happens in episode 1 of Telltale's Game of Thrones. You see, he could have stayed at home at Ironrath with his mother and protected the house, but he instead chose to go out with his father and fight at the Red Wedding. And you might be thinking, how's that good? Well, he's the eldest son, he's next in line, so he would have been the kind of person they want to keep alive. He was next in line, he's a very important person. So the fact he went into battle, despite the fact he's like kind of the firstborn, means that he's a great warrior. Now the next person we're going to talk about is Asher. Now Asher has an interesting history indeed. Whilst Roderick was very honourable, very kind of dutiful, and you know, kind of like a Robb Stark-esque character, Asher wasn't. Asher was always said to be brazen, he'd punch first, think later, and he was a very kind of mean-spirited character. Again, a lot of this does depend on how you kind of play him, but generally he is kind of a brutish mercenary. So he's different to his brothers and an outcast in many ways. Now he actually is an Essos. He banished himself from his lands to stop a war between the Forresters and the Whitehills. And you might be wondering, why would he banish himself? And I'm going to say, wait, I'll tell you. You see, he banished himself because he fell in love with Gwyn Whitehill, who is, you know, obviously a Whitehill. The Whitehills and the Forresters have a kind of brooding relationship, a very kind of vilified relationship, and it ends all the time, much like, again, Lannisters and Starks. I'm going to draw a lot of parallels here, because there are a lot of parallels. So that's Asher. Asher was exiled because he fell in love with a Whitehill girl, and was then sent to Essos. That's where he met Beskha, who you see in the game. I won't tell you too much about her, because I'll probably have a separate video on her specifically, but she is his companion and his friend for life. when he was left, when he was kind of abandoned, she was the only person he met, and they have a strong bond. It's not really a kind of relationship. It's a bit weird. It's like platonic, because they call each other brother and sister, so there's no kind of weird relationship going on. I think it's just like the friends, and they care about each other quite a lot. So that covers it for Asher. He goes to Essos because he falls in love. Next up, Mira. Mira was the first daughter out of all these children, so because of that she was given a very specific role indeed. She was very much Lady Forrester's daughter, and because of that kind of followed in her footsteps and was made to be much like her mother. And she was sent to the Southern Courts quite early on. It's not said when she was sent specifically, but she was sent, I would say, about 10 or 11, kind of not too young, so she didn't understand what was happening, but old enough to grasp the kind of basics. She was sent to the south, specifically with Margaery Tyrell, because House Branfield and House Forrester have ties with Margaery Tyrell. She was sent there, and she was supposed to kind of learn how to be a handmaiden, much like her mother did. Now this wasn't only so she'd be a handmaiden for life, this was so she could learn the way of the courts, and perhaps kind of marry on to somebody else. A lot of kind of things about Westeros is that you marry like a different house for a woman, and you try and carry on the name. So I imagine she was trying to do that, find a suitable match, while at the same time try to find out how the world works in different areas away from the north. Very much like what Sansa went through when she was sent to King's Landing and married Joffrey. Again, parallels with the Starks is natural, because the Starks were kind of arguably the protagonists of Game of Thrones, so drawing parallels is natural. She's much like Sansa in her nature as well. She's supposed to be kind of timid, sort of closed off, but as the series goes on, she kind of comes out of her shell and learns how to play the Game of Thrones. She is more dubious than she thinks. She can get away with more things than she thinks, and she certainly does. I'm not going to spoil what happens, because I said this would be spoiler free, but there's certain things that happen that make you think, like, yeah, she's different to what she thinks. She can accomplish more than she truly believes. But she was sent to the Southern Courts, and she doesn't really see her family. She sends letters sometimes, but she's more disconnected than a lot of them. Asher was exiled, but that was at a late age. He was always in kind of Ironrath since he was a kid. He didn't miss anything, but because she was sent as a child, she sort of doesn't have many ties to Ironrath. I mean, she cares about it, she likes Ironrath, but arguably she's the one who's seen the least of it out of all the family. So that's just an interesting thing to say. And when she went to the south, she decided she enjoyed it so much that she wanted to follow Margaery Tyrell to King's Landing and help her there. And that's what she does. At the start of the show, you're in King's Landing and you're the handmaid to Margaery Tyrell, and you're close friends. Even though you're a handmaid, even though you're below her, there is a kind of friendship mentality there as well. Mira's history is pretty short, but again, it's what you make of it. Kind of, it's what you do after the game starts that really matters. The next person we're going to talk about is Ethan Forrester. And he's different to his brothers. He doesn't want to take part in any wars. He doesn't want to learn how to play with swords. He instead is more of a kind of bookworm, more into songs and into the intellectual stuff. Naturally, he does get some kind of flack because of that. In Westeros, it's kind of preferred that the males kind of do swordplay and the women should go to court, but there are exceptions. Tyrion, for example, isn't doing any kind of swordplay. Well, he might do some in brothels, but not that kind of swordplay. But yeah, he's kind of intellectual, he's kind of clever, and he wants to kind of be a diplomat about all the kind of things in Westeros. So again, it depends how you play him. But he is a kind-hearted character, and somebody who kind of wants to do the best thing by his family and by everybody else. In that way, he's kind of naive, and kind of doesn't know what's happening, but less so than a lot of the other people, such as TALIA. TALIA is much like her brother. They're twins and they share a kind of bond. When Lady Forrester was pregnant, she had a prophetic dream about a child that said she would have the voice of an angel, and it was true. She does have a good voice, and that is shown in the game. She sings once, and it's quite good. It's pretty cool. It's a nice little feature, and it fits in with the lore as well, so it's cool in that way as well. But again, she is naive. It seems to be that the younger they are, the more naive they are. I think that's more natural than you think, but yeah, she is naive. She doesn't understand how the world works. She's she doesn't want Ethan to change. She wants him to stay the same forever, because apparently Roderick became kind of more serious as he was growing up. But again, that's not going to happen, that's impossible. So she's naive in that way, she's only a kid, naturally. But yeah, she shares a bond with Ethan, and she cares about him a great deal. They're probably the closest of anybody in the Forrester house. Next person we're going to talk about is RYON. RYON is the youngest of all the people in the house, and because of that, he's the most sheltered. He looks up to his kind of older family members, Roderick, Asher, and wants to be a warrior when he's older. Now, he doesn't know much about the world. He's only 7 when the game takes place, so he doesn't understand what's happening. He doesn't understand death, for example. But he does soon come to terms with what's happening when certain characters die and certain characters are tortured. Then he'll soon find out that the world isn't just bloody rainbows and cinnamon sticks. It's a dark and horrible place. I'm not sure how long the Game of Thrones game kind of takes place, whether we'll have like episodes a few years in the future or whatnot, but hopefully we'll get to see RYON grow up and see what happens. Because he is a good character, and because he's so young, it'll be interesting to see how he changes over the course of the game, and because of the events that take place in it. But there you go, that was all the Forrester members that I want to talk about. I mainly talked about the family, because I feel like talking about Maester Otegrin and Sir Roderick, people like that. They're not really Forresters, so it doesn't count. In Cipyaar, this has been Lightlaw. See you next time.